In a tweet gone viral, but has since been deleted, a climate scientist suggested the only way to save this planet from its climate change crisis is a mass pandemic which will cull a large portion of the human population. Now, this guy has written numerous articles. He's written for CNN. He's written for UK publications saying the end is nigh. For CNN, he says, if you knew what I knew, you'd be terrified. Maybe. I mean, look, I think it's fair to say that humans are polluting quite a bit. And it's predominantly coming from Southeast Asia, not so much the United States. But it's also true that there's something called the windshield phenomenon, which is quite scary. If you've heard of it, for those that haven't heard of it, it's when, when I was a kid, we'd go on a road trip and your windshield of your car would be splattered with bugs everywhere. Now, not so much. Now, you go driving and there's none. And they say this is due to the fact that bug populations are collapsing, which is scary because insects are towards the bottom of the food chain. And so you've got animals that rely on these insects to eat them, and then that basically sustains the ecosystem. You know, not completely, but, obviously quite a bit. The bottom of the food chain is very important because if the bottom breaks down, everything above it starts to fall apart. Now, that is worrisome. I can't say I know exactly what's causing the collapse in bug population, but I'm pretty sure it's probably pesticides and pollution. However, I do not believe the solution to the problem of bad technology or bad chemicals, things that have side effects, is to kill a bunch of humans, namely billions. I don't know that solves anything. However, it certainly seems that people like this man, many of them are in a similar mindset, but unwilling to admit it. And that's what's scary, I guess. This guy deleted his tweet, and he said it's not because he was shamed or wrong. It's people are misinterpreting it. I think the reality is he really does believe the population of the world should be crushed, but he regrets admitting it because of the backlash you get from humans. I will say this before we get into all of this news, and I read to you about the people who want to, say, I don't know, cull humans. We cull lots of species. We cull deer. I mean, deer is the obvious one. Last year, or maybe it was the year before, we had the deer were famished in the literal sense. They were gaunt and sickly. There was not enough food. There were too many deer. There were something like 20 deer sleeping on on our property at night. It was kind of wild. And I don't know what happened if people started culling them or killing them, but there wasn't enough food for the deer to go around, and so they were getting sickly. And so the argument from people is you got to kill off a bunch of them, and then the ones that remain will be happy, and they will know nothing but full bellies. I'm not convinced the idea of killing 5 billion people to save 500 million is an appropriate concept, especially when you're dealing with human intelligence, and the solution may just be technological. We get away from pesticides. We stop producing these highly polluting chemicals and products and plastics and things like this, and we adapt. That's what we do. We adapt. Humans with intelligence can solve these problems. Yet there are people who don't care and don't want to accept it, and they say, just kill everybody. Let's read from the Gateway Pundit first, and then I'll show you what this guy's really talking about. Sick. Climate scientists suggest culling the human population with a deadly pandemic. Now, I'd be a little softer in how I describe this. This guy's not saying he wants to. He's saying the only way we avert this crisis is if this happens. And I got to be honest. While the Gateway Pundit says he's suggesting that we do it, I wouldn't say their opinion is wrong. While the guy didn't literally say that, if you look at his past writings, you can see he's basically saying the end is nigh. And then he goes, if only there was a pandemic. I think we get what he's suggesting. Here's his tweet. Bill McGuire says, if I am brutally honest, the only realistic way I see emissions falling as fast as they need to avoid catastrophic climate breakdown is the culling of the human population by a pandemic with a very high fatality rate. He then links to a news article about the bird flu pandemic, which has an estimated mortality rate of 50 to 60%. H5N1, they say. It's been spreading outside of birds and into mammals. And there was gain-of-function research done some 20 or so years ago. An effort was made with gain-of-function research to get bird flu, H5N1, to jump from birds to mammals. They succeeded. It's a scary prospect. The Gateway Pundit writes, one government climate scientist made the mistake of blurting out the real endgame of so many radical environmental activists in a bid to preserve the planet, killing off the human population. Now, while certainly an opinion statement, I do believe it's fair to say many radical environmental activists, I don't know how many there are, really do think this is what we have to do. Bill McGuire, he's a professor of geophysical and climate hazards at University College of London, authored a tweet Sunday that lamented the fact carbon emissions were not falling nearly as fast as needed and suggested solving the climate crisis with a deadly pandemic to wipe out swaths of the human population. Well, after a righteous backlash from social media users, McGuire deleted his post and whined people took his words out of context, saying, right, I am deleting the initial tweet now, not because I regret it, but because so many people out there have mistakenly or intentionally taken it the wrong way. I don't think so. I don't think they did. Enough is enough already, he says. He then lied and claimed that his initial post was about falling economic activity, despite clearly referencing a pandemic killing off mankind. He said it's about suddenly falling economic activity, not people dying. My friend, you literally said culling of the human population. Now, you may wonder, well, who is this guy and why does he matter? Well, he's a volcanologist, climate scientist, a writer, a broadcaster, activist, socialist, best-selling author of Hot House Earth and Inhabitant's Guide. Now, who is he? Take a look at this from CNN Opinion. This from March 7th of this year. Opinion. I'm a climate scientist. If you knew what I know, you'd be terrified too. He writes, are you frightened by climate change? Do you worry about what sort of world we are bequeathing to our children and grandchildren? In the words of science writer and author of The Uninhabitable Earth, David Wallace Wells, no matter how well informed you are surely not alarmed enough. I'll just pause and say this. I am absolutely worried about what our children, figuratively, I don't have kids yet, and our grandchildren, figuratively, the next generation that comes before us, I'm worried about the world we're leaving them behind. Because there's socialists, there's communists, there are people that don't work, there are people that don't want to work, and they want to extract from the system. The funny thing is, the things I'm worried about overlap with the things this man is worried about. Take into consideration the abortion issue, the birth deficit below replacement rates. These things don't affect conservatives to the same degree that they affect liberals. The overlap here is when this man's talking about a culling, it overwhelmingly will impact urban liberals. I am not suggesting that is the appropriate solution. I'm saying that due to the lack of responsibility, capability, and ability to share information with the next generation, I believe these cities are headed for this inevitable circumstance of some kind of, I don't know if it'd be a mass die-off, that's, as he's suggesting, but a collapse, which could theoretically see their population struggle and eventually evaporate. They're aborting their kids. The cities, while they produce a decent amount of things valuable to our culture, don't produce food. And they're vectors for disease, as we're seeing now in Chicago with this mass migration invasion. Measles. If a bird flu pandemic were to happen, conservative folk out in the country, less likely to contract the disease due to being more sparsely populated, less contact with other people, less likely to be negatively impacted by pollution and waste buildup, being out in the beautiful wilderness. Why, here at the Timcast Media Studios, at Freedomistan we call it, we're surrounded by trees. We have multiple water sources. It's a fantastic property. We are impacted by pollution and these climate issues, same as anybody else, but to a different degree. This will absolutely just negatively impact liberals. And what I mean by this is whether there's a mass culling or die-off or anything, I think this man need not worry. I think this is devastating and terrifying, but I think the inevitable track is that urban liberals eventually cease to exist. I believe that there will be people remaining in the cities, but the population density will rapidly decline. Hyperconcentration of pollution, sickness, illness, and a lack of reproduction. People who live out in the countryside, conservative folk, much more likely to have kids, even if it still is on average lower than it needs to be. It's a lot higher than people in the city. This guy writes, I would put it even more strongly. If the fracturing of our once stable climate doesn't terrify you, then you don't fully understand it. The reality is that as far as we know, in the natural course of events, our world has never in its entire history heated up so rapidly as it's doing now. Nor have greenhouse gas levels in the atmosphere, ever seen such a precipitous hike. Think about that for a moment. We're experiencing in our lifetimes a heating episode that is probably unique in the last 4.6 billion years. How do we know this? We've been tracking climate, weather for a couple hundred years, but we also sample core. We take core samples from ice sheets in various glaciers. We can actually look at the atmospheric concentration of particles going way back, estimating by the age of the ice. It's actually quite fantastic. It's brilliant. He says, while those of us working in the climate science field know the true picture and understand the implications for our world, most others do not. And this is a problem, a big one. After all, we can't act effectively to tackle a crisis if we don't know its full depth and extent. What's happening to our world scares the hell out of me. But if I shout the brutal, unvarnished truth from the rooftops, will this really galvanize you and others into fighting for the planet and your children's futures? Or will it leave you frozen like a rabbit in headlights, convinced that all is lost? It is an absolutely critical question. With politicians and corporations unable or unwilling to take action rapidly enough to stymie emissions as the science demands, as all we as climate scientists are left with is to seek to rouse the public to try and force through via the ballot and consumer choices the enormous changes required to curb global heating. And that is, you will live in the pod, you will eat the bugs, and you will be happy. Otherwise, the only solution, as Bill says, is, unfortunately, a mass culling of billions of humans. That's amazing, right? Killing billions to save millions. It's kind of the opposite of the premise of Watchmen, where the bad guy says killing millions to save billions. How about that? Utilitarianism to its extreme. He says a major psychological study published by the scientific journal Lancet Planetary Health in 2021 found that most 16 to 25-year-olds in 10 countries across the globe were moderately to extremely worried about climate change, but more than half felt overwhelmed and powerless to act. It would seem reasonable to argue on the basis that painting an even worse picture wouldn't help. But if this is the case, does it mean we shouldn't provide people with the full facts if they are too scary? Surely not. In fact, this isn't a matter of scaring or not scaring people, but of informing them. As a climate scientist, it is my duty to tell you about what is happening to our world, whether it engenders fear or not. A failure to do this would mean that the public is left ignorant of the true extent of the climate emergency, which in turn can only hinder engagement and action. He shows this. They show this picture on CNN. An iceberg floats past houses on Disco Bay, Greenland, during unseasonably warm weather on July 30th, 2019. You know, we've heard the narrative over and over and over again, decade after decade after decade. And our powerful global elites are just buying beachfront property. So, my friend, we don't believe you. We don't. While there is a concern that science is showing that the planet is heating up, I do believe that it's fair to say we got a problem with mass pollution, seriously. And I blame most of Southeast Asia. That's the majority of where the pollution comes from. It's not the United States. Making people here use paper straws, I cringe. It's like nails on a chalkboard. Isn't going to solve the problem of people in Southeast Asia, namely the Pacific Islands, from dumping all of this waste. So I don't know what your answer may be. Declared an act of war to dump all this waste in our oceans, causing crises. I don't know for sure. And while this man is certainly saying the end is nigh, here's another article. This is from iNews UK. I'm a climate scientist, and I think society will collapse by 2050. Here's how I'm preparing. Do you believe that he is the only man who thinks humanity should be wiped out? And look, I get it. A culling is not wiping out humanity, but you get the point. I wonder how many people are brave enough to entertain this. brave enough to say, I know there are many conservatives who, it seems to be there's a split. I don't know the exact proportions, but I know that there are many conservatives who say all life is precious, liberal or otherwise. And these poor people just need to be shown the light. I also know there are conservatives who say the liberals are the problem, and good riddance. If they want a culling, then it'll impact them. How many people really want to say that? I'd be willing to bet that deep down there are many conservatives that when they hear this man say this, they think to themselves, well, you get rid of the cities, which is mostly the urban liberals who are who are polluting, and then we've reduced population and everyone's fine, right? Here's my point. It doesn't matter what you think. It doesn't matter what you feel. It matters what's true. And what's true is people in these cities are destroying themselves. This guy talks about the only solution is going to be a pandemic. Sure. And the people in the cities will be absolutely destroyed by it. And the majority of the conservatives will be okay. That's the world he's proposing. I think it's important to point this out. I oppose exactly what it is he's saying. It's nonsensical. What we need is efficient application of human passion and power. And that means we need a better system for raising children. The problem is these psychopaths have corrupted the system. And for what end? To destroy themselves. I'd have to imagine if you were to break down the real worldview of these people, they see it similarly to you and I. My view is this. We have, let's say, 100 million people. Just hypothetical number. If each and every one of them was passionate about a project and a specialty, we'd solve every problem. I mean, the decentralized computing power of all of these humans is incredible. Yet why does it not happen? Because you've got these crackpot leftists in this cult who are telling them insane things like boys and girls can switch back and forth and 2 + 2 = 5, and it's nightmarish. Why? I tell you, my friends, I believe that deep down, many of them completely agree. My vision of the future is teach the kids properly, and as they grow up, we have an efficient, functioning, decentralized computing power in the human mind, a tremendous economy, a free market, and people will adapt to the problems. When the crisis emerges, the decentralized computing power of the human mind will solve that problem. We need no culling. That's insane. On the other side, you have individuals like this, and they believe there should be artificial selection. The strong must survive. So by all means, entertain and push crackpot insane ideas. Let the weak chase them into oblivion, and then we will come out ahead. It's a scary prospect, I guess. One that's not logically wrong, probably just morally evil. And I think that's how they see the world. The way Alex Jones described it is that these people set bear traps, announce where the bear traps are, and then say, if you're too stupid to avoid them, it's your own fault. And that's what I see with all of this. People like this guy saying the only solution is a mass culling to make it fast. It's sad, really. I went to Reddit and I was researching the subject, and I found this. From Change My View 1 year ago, reducing the human population is the only viable environmental solution. Why? What happens if we don't? Life on this planet will not cease. The earth will continue. Something bad just might happen to humans. An artificial event, a man-made event, which results in a mass die-off, I suppose. I have to wonder. If it really is true that climate change is going to wipe everything out, I give you this. Bill McGuire's tweet. If I am brutally honest, the only realistic way I see emissions falling as fast as they need to avoid catastrophic climate breakdown, is the culling of the human population by a pandemic with a very high fatality rate. Okay. I give you this. If climate change is going to kill off billions of humans, for what reason do you need a pandemic to kill off billions of humans? I'm not saying Bill wants a pandemic. I think deep down he probably does, but that's not necessarily what he's saying. If the argument is climate change is going to destroy this planet and kill billions, then for what reason do you need a pandemic to wipe out any amount of people? If the end result is the same, people dying. If climate change really does kill billions in social and economic collapse, well, then shortly after the Earth would heal itself. Now, wouldn't it? It would have the exact same function as a mass pandemic. The logic isn't there. What they're saying makes absolutely no sense. So I wonder, what is the real reason they want culling? What is the real reason they tell people these things? Because the logic is not there. Was it AOC and Greta Thunberg saying that we had only a few years before the Earth was irreparably damaged and humanity was screwed? Humans aren't going to be wiped out by anything they're describing. The planet will get hot. Certain areas will run out of water. Trees will die. Bugs will die off. The population will struggle and start to collapse as people die and starve. And then after a generation or two, what? The Earth heals, as you've predicted, when the population collapses, in which case the ebbs and flows of Earth will continue regardless of anything you want to happen. So for what reason? For what reason would a pandemic make sense? The chaos of a pandemic would destroy technology and social order. The chaos of a pandemic would not do anything differently. It would be a more rapid collapse and breakdown. Is that it? You want to rip the Band-Aid off and just see everybody die because climate change is too slow? Unless there's another reason. And that other reason is control. Under a pandemic, they lock you in your home. They take away your rights, they take away your stuff, and it allows them to control what you do, who you speak with. That seems to make more sense, right? If climate change was a slow and gradual breakdown, humans would adapt to it. And even if people died, we would begin to adapt and build technologies and alleviate these problems. Some of these are horrific. You've got the, I think it was the Black Mirror episode where the bees died off. It's called colony collapse disorder. And so they replaced bees with artificial drone pollinators, and those bees go rogue and start killing people or something like this, I guess. I don't know where the logic is, but the sad reality is maybe there really is none. Maybe the Titanic has hit the iceberg and these people have just plumb lost their minds. Or humanity is a decentralized grid. Complex decentralized computing power, and the best ideas win. In which case, this is just another bump in the road for humanity. And it's not climate change. It is the Malthusian, deranged, climate alarmist. I think climate change is real. I think there's a lot of causes of it. I think humans are polluting too much. I think bug populations dying off is scary, and pesticides are probably doing this. I think there's perverse incentives all abound. But I will say this one last time. Whether it's climate change killing off billions, as they've described, or a pandemic doing it, the end result is the exact same. Billions of humans die. When that happens, the emissions will start to drop, right? The environment will begin to stabilize, right? So then, I suppose your argument is we do nothing. I suppose then the argument is they don't have one. And that's why people like Barack Obama buy waterfront property. Miami Beach is thriving. Martha's Vineyard, that's where Obama is. He doesn't seem to care that the climate change projections show his property will be underwater in the next 10 years, increasingly underwater. So maybe there's something else. Maybe the reality is it is fear to induce people giving up their control. Not sure. I suppose only time will tell, but I can certainly say I don't think we're stupid enough. Unfortunately, there are many people who follow this guy and live in big cities who are. I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up at 4 p.m. on this channel. Thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you all then.